All right. Hello, friends. Thank you for joining via Zoom today. Right now, like I said earlier, I wanted to announce it as early as possible so that everyone got the notice. Talk about keeping you on your toes. I'm sorry for keeping you on your toes the last couple weeks. Last week, without getting into so many details that you're like, Stephanie, that's too much. I was literally on the way to class. I live like 45 minutes away. On the way, and just suddenly got sick and had to pull over. So I knew there was no way I would make it home in time to do Zoom. And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna have to tell y'all as soon as possible. So I'm okay. There was something nasty going around. I don't know what it was, but keep yourself, safe out there and germ free. So I apologize. Hopefully the rest of the semester will go off without a hitch and we won't have too many issues. Yeah, there was something really just yuck going around. Um, I had a bunch of students out in another class too, like half of them gone. And I said, that's okay, stay home. We don't need to get everybody sick. So we're a little behind, my fault. What we're going to go over today is marriage and kinship. And so I might have a short video if we have time. Usually I don't get to show videos in our classroom because there's no speakers for some reason. I'm not sure, but we'll see if we have time. So, looking at marriage and kinship, Kotak brings up two different types of families. He brings up your family of orientation and your family of procreation. Excuse me. The family of orientation is the family that raised you. We've kind of moved towards language like that to say the family that raised you rather than saying your birth family, because some people are adopted and the family that raised you may not actually be biologically related to you. Or they might be biologically related, but maybe you're raised by grandparents or an aunt and uncle. So we instead say the family that raised you. That's your family of orientation. Your family of procreation is the family you create on your own when you take a partner, spouse, and children. Now, we know you don't have to get married to have children, so you don't even have to be a life partner. You can just have kids without that. But basically, think of the family that you are creating on your own if you are choosing to have children. I added the third found family, which is a newer term, and it started more within the LGBTQ plus community, where unfortunately, in that community, it's somewhat common for parents to basically shun you if you come out of the closet, if you come out as gay. And so what happens over the decades is you would have young kids, teenagers around that age. I guess that's not young kids, but technically kids. And they come out as gay, and their parents say, well, I want nothing to do with you, and sometimes kick them out of the house. What happens is you end up kind of looking for family elsewhere and you pick up people along the way. It might be a parental figure, someone in the community who's a little older than you and kind of shows you the ropes. It might be a sibling kind of relationship where it's someone around the same age as you, going through the same life stages as you. And you basically kind of build your family as you go. Now, even though that started in the LGBTQ plus community and it's really popular in like fandom talk, I would argue that most of us kind of have a found family. I think of myself, I have my blood related and legally related family, and then I have my best friend who I have known since kindergarten, which if I think about it too hard, was about 35, more than 35 years ago. So we've known each other a long time. That is why her children call me Aunt Muffy. Long story, her eldest, when he was a toddler, could not pronounce Steffi, and so it came out as Muffy. They all now call me Muffy, and I am proudly Muffy. But they call me their aunt, and I call them my nieces and nephews. We are not blood related. We are not legally related in any way. but that's my family. And so I think a lot of us kind of have a found family of the people we consider close, like family that we're not actually related to. I forgot I normally have my little timer up to make sure I don't blabber too much. I got it up now. So, defining marriage. I'll go over a few different types of marriage today, including plural marriages where more than two people are included, including fraternal polyandry. So a lot of times we'll get into it, but a lot of times when we think of plural marriages, we think of the one man and multiple wives combination. And the reason for that is it's the most common of plural marriages, but there is fraternal, meaning brothers, polyandry, where one woman marries multiple brothers. And I'll explain why that even happens. Because you might think it's not just like she's attracted to all the brothers and can't make up her mind. It's a little more detailed than that. And I will also briefly bring up same-sex marriage because that's something we're talking about nowadays. I warned this happens once in a while in anthropology. We get two words that sound very, very similar. Those two are exogamy with an EX and endogamy with an END like David. We'll get to endogamy soon, but first we'll focus on exogamy. Exogamy, you can kind of think ex like exit, exile, outside. It is marriage outside of one's own group. Historically, this practice has been used to link people to a wider social network. So, if you have two neighboring tribes and a son from one tribe marries a daughter from another, then you are expanding your social network. Now the families know a family in the other tribe, whereas previously maybe they didn't know anyone in that tribe. It also preserves political alliances. So if you like historical films or books or just history, you know in the European dynasties in our history, we were marrying princes and princesses off to each other. Some of the famous, like Marie Antoinette and Louis. I'm trying to remember which Louis says. Louis XVI, I think she was married to. Yes, because Louis XIV was his grandfather. I'm quizzing myself. But I might be off a little bit, but she was from Austria and she was an arranged marriage where her royal family in Austria got together with the royal family in France and said, "Hey, we need to preserve our political alliance. So how about our daughter marries your son and then they'll rule together?" How that preserves alliances is, think of it this way. Let's say Austria and France marry off their kids, and now the Queen of Austria has a daughter living in France. And let's say something happens that sours the relationship politically between France and Austria. Historically, Europeans turn to war a lot, so they may have said, "Ooh, let's go to war." But you're going to be less likely to enact war if your kid is over in the other country. So it kind of forces them to take a diplomatic approach first rather than just going to war. The other thing that exogamy helps us avoid is incest. You've probably heard that word before. Technically, it means sexual relations with a close relative, but it is varying degrees and varying views of who is considered a close relative. Some societies say it's not only acceptable, it's encouraged to marry your cousin. Americans would say absolutely not. But even in American culture or European culture, if you go back 100, not 100 years, let's say 150 years or before, it was much more common to marry your cousin. So some societies still practice that, Most of us in the Western world have now figured out we don't want to marry our cousins. But there's reasons why you want to avoid incest, and I will get into some of the reasons. So, who do you consider a cousin? It can be really confusing. In some Native American tribes, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, your cousin is a member of a different moiety. Moiety just means half. So you basically take the tribe and divide them into two groups. And if you are in group A, members of group B are considered your cousins. Members of group A you can't marry, members of group B you can. So there they're saying it's actually encouraged to marry your cousin. But are the cousins actually blood related? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Think of your own family. Some of us have cousins that we call cousins that we're not actually related to. In anthropology, we would call them fictive cousins. I've also heard them called play cousins. Basically, I'll think of my family, for example. My actual cousins that are my mom's siblings' children. I know them, we're Facebook friends, but geographically we don't live next to each other. And age-wise, we're kind of far apart, so we're not super close. They're still my cousins, but we're not really tight. Versus, there are two lovely people that I call my cousins, and I call their mom and dad my aunt and uncle. We are not related, neither by blood or by law. Basically, what it is their parents and my parents are best friends. And so we grew up together. And I actually spent more time with them than I did my actual cousins. So, culturally, could I marry one of these fictive play cousins? Yeah, I could. Genetically, we wouldn't have any issues if we had kids, but I'm not gonna marry them because, ew, they're my cousins. I know I'm not actually related to them, but in my mind, in my heart, I'm like, no, they're damn near siblings. No, no. So it kind of depends on the society. Some will say absolutely marry your cousin, that's ideal. Others, like a lot of Westerners, will say absolutely not, do not marry your cousin. One of the reasons why we want to avoid marrying cousins is to avoid incest. Even in non-human primate groups, they typically leave their family of orientation to strike out on their own and either be solitary or join a different group. So even in our primate cousins, pun intended, um, they also know to avoid incest. Now, anthropologically, sometimes we've found instances, excuse me, that looks like incest. When we're tracing family trees, we usually get the titles from the person whose family we're tracing. And so they'll say, oh, this is my Uncle Gene or my Aunt Mary. And so with Ojibwe kinship terms, for example, they will use the same term for brother as they will male cousin. And so when they do their family tree, it will show a bunch of brothers and sisters. However, some of those quote brothers and sisters they can marry because they're far enough removed genetically that it's not going to cause an issue. But where it can look like incest is the anthropologist just hears a conversation of some Ojibwe person saying, "Oh yeah, I have a wedding coming up this weekend. Yeah, my friend is marrying her brother." And the anthropologist says, "Oh, no, don't marry your brother." And then they have to explain, like, "Oh yeah, it's her brother, but it's her brother on her mom's married side or something like that." And then you figure out, oh, it's a like fraternally related cousin. So it sounds a lot closer to incest than it might be. It's still a cousin, but it's not a sibling. Now, where it does get kind of yucky, sibling marriages have happened historically. In ancient Egypt, sibling marriages accounted for about 24% of marriages during the first and third centuries. Now, you're going to be sitting there wondering, why on earth were they marrying their siblings? It has to do with the mythology. So, I am not an expert in Egyptology, but my basic understanding is so if we look at ancient Egypt, religion is really important. And the leaders, the pharaohs, are also really important. Couple of things to keep in mind. Pharaohs were the celebrities of the day. And think of now with celebrity influencers. Maybe not you, but some of you may have bought a product because an influencer told you about it. Not that you're just blindly following influencers, but let's say it's somebody you followed on TikTok for years and you trust them, and they say, hey, if you're a student, you should use blah, blah, blah planner. And they show you about it, and you go, oh, that does look like a good planner, and you try it out. Same kind of thing. The average person in ancient Egypt, many of them wanted to emulate the pharaoh's lifestyle. The pharaoh, also good to know, in mythology, the pharaoh is basically a god, not just god-like. He is the human embodiment of the sun god Ra. When he dies, he becomes the human embodiment of the god of the underworld, Osiris. Osiris, pictured on the left, was married and in love with Isis, pictured on the right. That sounds all well and good, except they were siblings. They fell in love in the womb, which sounds kind of romantic until you go, wait a minute, why were they in the same womb at the same time? Because they were twins. So, they're gods, though. It doesn't affect them the way it affects us. Unfortunately, as a way to emulate the gods, the pharaohs started to marry their siblings. And then the general public started to emulate the pharaohs, and we saw an increase in sibling marriage. Where this is problematic, which I will get into, is genetics. We need genetic diversity to have healthy offspring. And so, if you have babies with a sibling or a close relative, your babies can have genetic issues. Think of King Tut, Tutankhamun. He was a young pharaoh who now we understand was pretty much riddled with physical ailments. He could barely walk, he had a lot of issues. Unfortunately, that is because of years and years of incest and inbreeding in his family tree. Now, you would think, okay, well, that was ancient Egypt. Clearly, we've figured out not to do that now. Is incest or incest avoidance, I should say, excuse me, is avoiding incest a biological trait or is it cultural? I would argue it's a little bit of both. We have learned as a species over many, many generations that incest can lead to genetic issues in our offspring. It can lead to a decline in the fertility rate and genetic and developmental issues in our children. We have learned there is more to gain from genetic diversity. I'm going to bring up some royal families, but it's not just the royals. If you think of anthropology and evolution, a lot of us, if we think evolution, we think Charles Darwin, the father of evolution. And you would think this man was writing books and publishing papers about genetic diversity and how important it was. But he was a man of the Victorian era. It was more common to marry cousins. He married his first cousin. I believe half of their children didn't live past the age of 11. Now, part of that was it was really easy to die as a child in the Victorian era, unfortunately. But the other reason is he married his first cousin. So it's a little frustrating to look at it with 2026 vision and say, Charles, buddy, why weren't you figuring this out? But he's just couldn't figure it out, didn't know why his kids were dying. And I'm sure it was heartbreaking. I'm not trying to make light of that, but it's a little frustrating when you think like, well, I can figure out why Charles, but he couldn't figure it out. If you want to see how much incest avoidance is interwoven into our culture, for those of you that maybe only know him from Capital One commercials and the Avengers, this is my guy Samuel L. Jackson. You don't have to shout it out, but what is his favorite thing to call people? Starts with a mother and ends with a, I'll say, ucker. That is one of the worst things you can call someone in our language, is a mother effer. Because we are saying, oh, you're so terrible, you want to sleep with your own mom. That's how bad that is. It is so ingrained in our language that that's the worst thing you could call someone. Now, I'm going to playfully talk crap about the British royal family. This is in no way meant to be disrespectful to any of the ill or any of the recently departed. All of the information I'm about to give you is public knowledge, and I would argue, as an American, it is a time-honored American tradition to talk crap about the British royal family. We celebrate it every 4th of July. So this is the British royal family. Some of these members have passed on. Some have kind of basically left the family for other issues. But this is the family that we mostly know. Go back a couple generations. You've heard of the Victorian era. That is named after the Queen, Queen Victoria. She was married to Prince Albert. They were famously in love. So in love that they had a whole bunch of children. And so in love that when he passed away, it was customary to wear black if you lost somebody you loved, but usually it was just for a short amount of time. I believe, I might be wrong, but I think Queen Victoria basically just wore black for the rest of her life after she lost Prince Albert. And she was a fashion icon of her day. A lot of people, a lot of trends happened because of her, like wearing black and things like that. Now, they're important to the story because they were first cousins. So, unfortunately, well, I should say luckily for them, because unfortunately, marrying your first cousin and having children could lead to a lot of genetic defects. Thankfully, most of their kids were relatively healthy, and this was back in the 1800s, so marrying your first cousin was a little more common at the time. But it's important to know because eventually we get to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Both have now passed on. They got married in the 1900s. And when they got married, it was also advertised as this romantic love story. Now, there was also a really big age gap that to me makes me go, but that's neither here nor there. They advertised, like the actual royal family was approving publications saying, look at their family tree. You can see it on the left. Both of these people, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, both hail from Queen Victoria. So they are not first cousins, a little more distant, but still cousins. So where I get a little salty is you have these first cousins, they fall in love and get married, they have kids, couple generations, you have these cousins who fall in love and get married and have a bunch of kids. And then a few generations later, this same family is arguing and being racist towards Meghan Markle by claiming she's bringing too much diversity into their family. I would argue, and I'm going to get a little salty, I would argue if your family tree looks more like a wreath, meaning there's no branches, you desperately need some genetic diversity. So, kudos to Meghan and Harry for saying, I kind of want out of this. Thankfully, it looks like because now with this, well, not the youngest generation, because they're the kiddos, my generation, they've married kind of outside of that realm. So I think, hopefully, their family should be able to kind of course correct and still have healthy babies that will have long lives. So hopefully, it's worked out because if we kept marrying our first cousins or even our second cousins, we could end up with some major issues. Now, just to drive the point home, what happens when the royal family inbreeds way too long? You end up with King Charles II of Spain. He was also known as the Bewitched. These are some portraits of him. He lived in the 1600s. He had a somewhat short life, about 38, 39 years, and he was riddled with genetic issues. So, his family had been inbreeding for many, many generations, marrying first cousins. When he was born, he could not speak. He barely could chew his own food. He couldn't really walk that well. He had a lot of mental defects where they basically just decided not to educate him, like to not even bother. But he was in a patriarchy. So even though he had a sister who was pretty healthy and smart, they wouldn't make her queen. They insisted on making him king. Now, all of this is not to make fun of poor King Charles. It wasn't his fault. But he was a very odd man. He had a lot of mental issues, and they married him off. What happened is he most likely was barren, meaning he was infertile. He couldn't have children. I'm not going to make it sound as if evolution is an all-powerful being that struck down the family, but basically, where natural selection kind of steps in and says, okay, that's enough, is this family had been inbreeding for generations. And eventually, their offspring stopped being fertile. They could not have children anymore. And realistically, I'm not trying to say like, oh, good thing, but realistically, they were still marrying their kids off to their cousins. It would have just continued, and their offspring probably would have been even worse off than poor King Charles. So, interesting blip in our history, in Spain's history, I should say, where we can kind of see that inbreeding can be an issue. I'll stop talking about incest. So that is exogamy with an EX. This is endogamy with an END. Endogamy is marriage of people from the same social group. Usually, we see it practiced within your own society, sometimes within your own religion or within your own race. Some people are really strict about who they would even date, others not so much. Think of nowadays, you very likely will date people that you interact with in your everyday life. That's how you meet them. Nowadays, it's 2026. A lot of us are meeting people online, so it's a little different. But even so, you're usually looking for someone in the same circles, someone who has similar hobbies as you, which makes sense. You want to have common interests with somebody if you're trying to spend your life with them. Religion also makes sense. If your goal is to find somebody to start a life with and have children, it's going to be a lot easier to raise children if you agree on the big things like religion. It's not impossible if you don't agree on that, but it's going to make things easier. Homogamy is within similar backgrounds. Just kind of a word to throw in there, but homogeneous or homogeny is basically when we have kind of the same background. Historically, it has also helped to concentrate wealth. Think of, okay, I'll use myself as an example because I have student loans. If I were to go marry somebody like Jeff Bezos, um, first of all, you would say, Stephanie, how in the world? Because you are not in the same circles. I don't know, humor me, but we get married. I don't really want to marry him, but I don't know. His wealth would technically decrease when we got married because I bring to the table student debt and he brings to the table billions of dollars. Now, he has so much money that my student loan debt to him would be like paying the tab at a restaurant and he probably wouldn't bat an eye. But technically, his wealth would go down a little bit. Versus if he marries another billionaire, now your wealth has increased. So if you are a wealthy family and you want your children to stay wealthy, you want them to marry from another wealthy family so that now those two kids can build on that wealth. We see that even today with like Ivy League mixers. If you go to like Yale, Princeton, Stanford, all of those big schools, frequently they will have mixers where it will be basically a social hour of students mingling from other majors, other schools, but all from similar backgrounds. Nowadays, thankfully, you can get like scholarships to go to Ivy League. You don't have to come from wealth, but it is likely if you do come from wealth that you will go to one of those schools. Now, looking at an extreme example of endogamy, India as a country has a very long history and rich culture. For a few thousand years, they had a caste system. This is similar concepts to like social classes, but not exactly the same. So, with social classes in the US, the idea is that I can move from one into another. Ideally, you want to do it the way that's better for you, where I go from lower class to high class. But you can definitely do it the other way, where you start out in high class and you lose your money or something and you get into low class. But it's a little more of an accomplishment and achieved status. Versus in the caste system, it was an ascribed status, meaning you were born into your caste and there was no way to get yourself into a better caste in this life. I'm not an expert on like the Hindu religion and Indian culture, but my understanding is in order to better your caste, you basically have to live your life well so that you're reincarnated into a better caste. Like that's kind of the only option. So their social statuses assigned at birth and unchangeable. Technically, the caste system has been outlawed in India since the 1940s. But when you have something in place for a few thousand years and then you suddenly just say, okay, don't do that anymore, it's really hard to get it out of the culture. So even though the caste system no longer exists, in air quotes, it still kind of socially exists. Intercaste sexual unions are forbidden, and if you participate, the idea is that the person from the higher caste is now deemed religiously impure, spiritually impure. Where you can see a patriarchy alive and well is if you are a man who does this and is ritually impure, you can fix it by prayer and doing a ritual bath. If you are a woman, you can't fix it. You're just impure for the rest of your life. So it really, really discourages intercaste unions. And arranged marriage is pretty common in India still, not the only practice, but it's still somewhat common where the two families kind of interact and decide if this is a good match. So a lot of times women who are born into the lowest caste are looked down upon so much that it's hard for them to date. And they unfortunately do face gendered violence. I have a very short video if it will play. We'll see if my technology works. As a heads up, they don't get graphic, but they do mention like sexual assault. Not in great detail or anything. I just want to give you a heads up. So let me see if my volume works.
I say I'm Dalit, people say things like, really, you don't seem sad
I
enough.
can hear it. It's
And
good.
women
Thank you.
lie at the bottom of the gradation of both caste and gender. We are not allowed the same pathways to dignity and justice that other women receive. India's caste system is over 3,000 years old. And it divides Hindus into four main categories. Dalits, also known as untouchables, don't even make it into this hierarchy. When India gained independence, discrimination on the basis of caste was made illegal. But cases of violence against the Dalit community are still reported on a daily basis. Today, Dalit women make up 16% of India's female population. That's your mic? My mic is in there. We spoke to some of them about how they live with caste discrimination and gender bias. While walking away, he said, we're never going to work out. My parents are never going to say okay to our relationship because you're Dalit. And it didn't matter that I was studying and he had dropped out and he was practically doing nothing with his life. He still thought his parents would say no to me because according to caste, I'm supposed to be the dropout. Another student does well, people say, wow, what a smart person. I do well, people say, who did she copy from? My whole life has been a construction towards hiding this identity.
पूरा ऐसा समाज है ना जिनको ये बोलना कि मैं चमार हूँ ये बड़ा अंदर से पहले रुकते हैं फिर निकलते हैं ये जो कश्मकश है ना ये बहुत डिफिकल्ट होता है
I am also a survivor, and I have many survivors of caste-based sexual violence in my family. It's a unique spectrum of crimes that includes being stripped naked, having your head shorn, being, tarred, black, being raped, and being even murdered. I received some extremely rude, extremely aggressive commentary both in front of myself.
Ever.
Oh, she's back. Whoops.
Back. I know. No, you're talk crap about me. No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Sorry about that.
No,
We weren't talking crap, I promise.
We told him to be the teacher, and he said if he was, he'd get kicked off campus.
Sorry about all that. Suddenly I said, uh-oh, it's done. So I guess the video is done. I'm not going to try to, my internet didn't approve, so I got a little bit more to cover. I'll continue on. So same-sex marriage, a little brief history here is Canada legalized same-sex marriage in 2005. United States was a little behind. It took us till 2015 to legalize it. Now, the good news is I'm not going to make you debate on how you feel about it, but it is legal. The reason why it took us till 2015 is because of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act it was passed in 1996. We have a tendency in this country to title things that makes it sound like a really good thing, like defense of marriage. That sounds lovely. But what it did was explicitly define marriage legally as exclusively a heterosexual union. And so it wasn't just let's pass same-sex marriage. We had to first strike down DOMA and then get same-sex marriage passed. So it took a while. Now, to kind of briefly explain why, me personally, I think it's a good thing. In no way am I going to get into religious reasons for or against, but the reason why I like it is it gives a little more safety for legal partners. So if you are in a relationship with somebody, love each other dearly, you've discussed what to do in case you're in a coma or something like that, but you're not legally married, a lot of hospitals will not let you in. So let's say something horrible happens and your partner, who you've been with for 20 years, love them dearly, but legally you're not allowed to get married. Something happens to them where they're in a coma. You would want to be by their side. You love them dearly. You would be married if you could. But the hospital says, you don't count as family because legally you're not tied to them. So it also has some other good things with that note, like getting on health insurance, things like that, that you can legally get married. It doesn't mean every single gay person wants to be in a two-person monogamous relationship, But it's nice to kind of have that option so that you can have security in place so that you can take care of each other in like hospital stays or things like that. Now, arranged marriage, I mentioned, we have a tendency to think of like Marie Antoinette, where she didn't meet her spouse until like a couple of days before their wedding. Not all arranged marriages look like that, but sometimes they do. Those do exist. Oftentimes, it's the two families coming together and saying, we agree on uniting these families, and we should do that with these two kids, one from each family, and they should get married. And we think they'd be a good match. Love is stressed as the most important part of marriage in Western societies. This concept is starting to spread to other parts of the world, partially in response to like Hollywood and TVs and music. Look at how many different movies America has produced about love triumphing over anything else. We have Romeo and Juliet, even though, spoiler alert, they die. But Romeo and Juliet, we herald it as this great love story, even though their families don't like each other. We say, who cares if your families disagree? You're in love and 13. Sorry. I love the story Romeo and Juliet, but every time I watch the movie version, I catch myself thinking like, you are 13, Juliet. Calm down. Um, so we, because we kind of perpetuate this idea that love is more important than family to start your new family, that has carried over into other societies, and some areas are now seeing people marrying for love more than an arranged marriage. And that's not to say if you're in an arranged marriage that you don't love your spouse, especially if you've built a life together. I'm sure there is love there. You just didn't get married because you were in love first. Now, in a lot of societies, like I said, marriage is a group effort. Non-industrial societies tend to have the families involved in the marriage arrangements. Frequently, when it's a group effort, you give a gift at the wedding ceremony, at the union. We do that now as well in our culture, but usually we're giving a gift to the couple. So it'll be something for their new home together, like a cutlery set or a rice cooker, something like that. Um, I love when couples register for like really ridiculous gifts. And it's, yeah, that I kind of like. I don't have the money to buy them the ridiculous gifts, but I'm like, yeah, put it on the register. Maybe somebody does. The two different types of gifts, we have dowries and lobola. Dowries are substantial gifts to the husband's family from the wife's group. And a lobola is a substantial marital gift from the husband and his kin to the wife and her family. Lobola is a newer anthropological term or a newer term we've adopted. It used to be called bride price. And the reason why we stopped saying that is it made it sound like you were literally purchasing a bride. Whereas in reality, what a lot of these families view it as is kind of trying to signify to her family, we're aware that you're not losing a daughter, you're losing a member, you're losing a helper, you're losing a worker, and we want to compensate you for that. It's also insurance against divorce. Think of it this way, if you have to give the gifts back, typically in our culture, if you get married and I buy you a toaster, and then 3 years later you get divorced, I don't expect you to send me the toaster back. Like, I don't want it. I don't even expect like a gift card for the toaster value. I just chalk it up to, I bought you a gift at the time. Things didn't work out. Oh well, you probably still got a good use out of the toaster. But In a lot of these situations, you're expected to give the gift back. So it forces couples, instead of jumping into divorce, to kind of reassess and see if it's worth it, like, or if they should stick it out because they'd have to pay the gift back. This gorgeous bride, I believe, is Nigerian, and there is a tradition. I don't know how widespread it is, but it comes from Nigeria. And basically, the bride stands at after the wedding, at the reception. She stands there, and her family and friends and new groom gather around her, and they basically throw cash money at her. And the tradition is she's not allowed to smile until she deems the gift worthy. And I like that. I think we should institute that just at like birthdays. I want people to throw money at me until I'm like, yeah, that's enough. I think we should do it. I'm half joking, but if somebody started that at a birthday party, I'd be like, yeah, yeah, I'll take money. Now, what happens if our marriage is for political union or unions of two families and one of the spouses passes away, especially if it's a very young, new union? If we need to maintain alliances, sometimes the left behind spouse will marry the sibling of the deceased spouse. When it is a man marrying the sister of his deceased wife, we call it a sororate, kind of like sorority, versus when it's a widow who marries the brother of her deceased husband, it's a levirate. Now, you or I might be thinking, if you have siblings that are married, you might be thinking, like, I'm not marrying my brother-in-law if something happens to my sister. And I'm the same way. He'll figure it out. He can fend for himself. But think of it also if we're looking historically, when women didn't have a lot of rights. Let's say you're married and you have a couple of young kids. You're not allowed to have a job. You don't have any wealth, and your husband dies suddenly and very young. You're going to be out on the street because how else are you going to feed those kids? How are you going to take care of yourself and the kids? Versus his brother might step up and say, hey, we may fall in love eventually, but right now this is out of necessity. We're going to get married, and therefore I'm going to be able to support you and the kids. Now, divorce does happen. In the United States, something we see is marriage rates have gone down and cohabitation has gone up, meaning more people are living together while not being married. And so we're seeing a trend of people kind of being roommates for a while, either never getting married or getting married eventually. One of the reasons for that is cohabitation is cheaper. We all know rent and mortgages are expensive. It's cheaper if you have two incomes. Divorce rates drop during times of economic crises. This doesn't mean people are happier during a Great Depression or a recession. What it means, again, is rent is expensive. Divorces are expensive. Even if you agree to just split the assets 50-50, you still have to pay to file for a divorce, I believe. So it can cost money. If you both just lost your jobs, you might stick it out for a little while longer because you can't afford rent somewhere else by yourself. You can't afford moving costs. You can't afford the actual divorce attorney. So you just kind of stick it out until times improve. Marriages for political alliances do not dissolve as easily as those for love. It makes sense if you marry for love and that love is gone, then it kind of makes sense to get divorced. Versus if you got married because France and Austria told you to for political alliances and you don't love each other, too bad. Too bad. You're there for political alliances. It's a lot harder to get divorced. Divorce is also harder in patrilineal societies versus in matrilineal societies. It's usually a pretty simple affair. The couple just decides this is no longer working and they go their separate ways. That doesn't mean there's never arguing or fighting in a matriarchy, but it's just a little easier to go through the actual process of divorce. Now, when divorce isn't an option, things can get dangerous. This is Julia Tofana, and a very fast-talking lady is going to tell you a little bit about her. It is said, we don't have actual proof, but it is theorized that she helped kill over 600 men when divorce was not an option. So, let me show you this real quick, and then I'll continue on.
Giulia Tofana is estimated to have provided the poison which killed 600 men. She concocted a tasteless and untraceable poison which she disguised in makeup bottles. The women who would buy her poison were often
Oh, good, sorry.
sold into marriages that were loveless and abusive.
Let's stop pushing
Women in
buttons.
17th century Italy only had three options at the time: get married, remain single while earning a living as a sex worker, or become a wealthy widow. Many women chose a third option, and so Tofana's business flourished. As her business grew, Tofana became known as a friend to troubled women. Her poison was thought to contain arsenic and could kill a man in 4 to 6 drops. It would kill the victim over the course of a few days and so would mimic a disease. This gradual decline would help the victim get his affairs in order. This meant that his widow would be taken care of after his death. Tofana would probably have gone for years without being caught had it not been for one woman changing her mind. After putting the poison in a bowl of soup, this woman then begged her husband not to eat it. He then abused her until she admitted that she got the poison from Tofana. Tofana was then executed with 3 of her helpers and 40 of her customers.
So, Julia Tofana, did she kill 600 men? We're not 100% sure. But basically, divorce wasn't really easy. And so if women got backed into a corner by maybe an abusive husband or just didn't want to be married anymore, quite a few of them would turn to murder. In no way am I saying that's a correct or good solution, but sometimes it can get dangerous. Now, I mentioned plural marriage. Plural marriage is kind of the all-encompassing term that refers to having more than two total spouses simultaneously. Many non-industrial societies allow this type of marriage. The most common is one man with multiple wives. In our country, plural marriage is illegal. But it's still practiced. You just can't legally get married to more than one person at the same time. Where we see it practiced a lot that we hear about is within the Mormon community. Now, this is not saying that all Mormons are polygamous. In fact, the actual Mormon church, I believe, has come out and said, we don't do that anymore, we don't encourage it. But there are small groups of people that consider themselves Mormon who do practice this. Now, where me personally I'm okay with it is when you're consenting adults. So, this is a reality show, TLC's Sister Wives. Reality show meaning it's amped up for television. It's probably dramatized, made a little more exciting. But realistically, this did follow a Mormon man. He called himself Mormon, and he thought it was his divine right to have multiple wives and that that's what God wanted for him. Now, it's a reality TV show, so there's tons of drama. The wives don't always get along, and I believe, spoiler alert, I believe they're all divorced now, but technically illegal if they tried to legally get married. The other photo is from a fictional TV show that was on HBO called Big Love. I used to love this show. Now, it's HBO, so if you thought the reality TV was amped up for drama, this is really amped up. There's going to be a lot of sex, a lot of violence, a lot of drama. But realistically, the reason why this TV show was made is there have been small groups of people who call themselves Mormon living on compounds where people aren't really allowed on and off very easily. And where they touch on in this fake show, but that really has happened, is they were doing marriages with children, where it would be like a 50-year-old man married to a 14-year-old girl. That to me is a hard pass because those are kids. Um, if it's a sister wives kind of situation where they're all adults and they all know about each other, I, me personally, I don't care what you do in your bedroom. Um, whatever. But as long as you're adults. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I'm a monogamist. And a lot of us are, but a lot of us are practicing serial monogamy. Serial monogamy is when you have many spouses over time, but never at the same time. We have a lot of celebrities that do this. A lot of celebrities get married very, very quickly, very easily, and then they realize, ooh, I don't know if this is going to work out. If you're old like me, when we were growing up, the celebrity we talked about was Elizabeth Taylor. Now, she was married a lot. She got married 8 times before her death. But, oh, I'm sorry, I need to update this. He's current president Donald Trump. Can you tell this was from a couple years ago? He's been married 3 times, which is a lot for most of our presidents, but that's not as much as Miss Elizabeth Taylor. But we know about his marriages because he's always been in the public eye, even before politics. So much so that if you like a campy, fun movie, I'm going to recommend to you The First Wives Club. It is with Goldie Hawn, Diane Keaton, and Bette Midler. And the movie basically follows 3 women that have been friends since college who got married young, and then their husbands have all left them for younger women. And so they want to enact revenge. Now, whole long hilarity ensues in the movie. At the end of the movie, there's a gala where it's supposed to be for women. And they get Miss Ivana Trump, who was Donald Trump's first wife. She was going through a messy, messy divorce with him where we all knew all of their business. And she famously took a lot of his money. So she had this line that says, "Don't get mad, get everything." That's how much we knew about his business. Like, not just New Yorkers, the rest of us also knew his business. Whether or not that's okay. He was a celebrity. We know celebrities' business. So we tend to make fun of celebrities, but regular people get married multiple times too. True monogamists would, the first person you ever sleep with and date is the only person you will ever be with. And for some of us, that sounds romantic and nice. And for some of us, we're thinking, ooh, no. Um, so a lot of us would qualify as serial monogamists. Now, a type of plural marriage is polygyny. This is when you have one man with more than one wife at the same time. What's interesting is in communities where this is allowed, you still have most men in monogamous relationships. Kind of like how here the standard relationship is monogamy, but we still nowadays have the conversation about people being polyamorous, is the word we use, where they can date or marry more than one person at a time. It really comes down to the individual. So even when we say, okay, men, it's encouraged to take as many wives as you can support, a lot of men will say, I just want the one. I'm good. Historically, why you would want multiple wives is to maximize how many children you can have. Biologically, a female human can only get pregnant once a year or give birth once a year. If you're lucky, if you're trying to have a lot of kids, you might have a multiple birth and she might have twins or triplets, but she can only give birth once a year. So you're kind of to 1 or 2 kids a year. However, one male human can impregnate as many women as he's lucky too. So in this instance, like this man on the screen from South Africa, he has four wives. If he's lucky, he could impregnate all four of them in a year and then have four children rather than one. This is common in pastoral communities because if you're raising 500 goats, you need a lot of people to help you out. So the more kids, the better. And similarly, the more wives, the better. Because if you have 20 kids, one woman pushing out 20 kids, ooh, that's going to be rough. And one woman raising 20 kids, even rougher. But if you have four women collectively raising the children and kind of having communal support, it's going to feel a little easier. Now, I mentioned for me personally, as long as you're consenting adults, I don't care what you do. But this is where I personally have an issue, is in polygyny, in societies that practice polygyny, it is very common for men to marry later in age than women. For example, the Kanuri people of Bornu in Nigeria, the average age range when first married for men is between 18 and 30. Women, and I hesitate to even say women because they are girls, is between 12 and 14. Now, it's a different society. For them, the ages of 12 to 14, that's an adult. She's biologically capable of having children, and they think she is therefore able to raise children, have a family, and be an adult. Me personally, I would say no, because I think of my niece who's 14. I could not imagine taking her and saying, okay, here's a 30-year-old man. I'm going to marry you off to him. Good luck. I could not imagine that personally. So it's hard for me because if we're being generous, let's say she's 14 and he's 18. Yeah, that's still a big age gap for me, but that's a little closer. They're at least closer in age. But let's say he's 20 and she's 13, but that's his first wife. So he ages over the next 3 or 4 years, and now he's 24, and he marries another 13-year-old. Few years go by, now he's 28, and he marries a 12-year-old. That age gap keeps getting bigger and bigger. Not only does that yuck me out because that's a child, I also think what in the world do you have in common with a 12-year-old when you're pushing 30? What do you have to talk about? I think of I think of the age difference. I'm in my 40s, but my nieces and nephews, the two youngest, are like 10 and 8. And you know what they think, or at least it's probably done now, but do you know what they thought was the peak humor? 6, 7. I still don't know why that was funny. And I just assume that it's not for me to know why it's funny. It's not for my generation. I think of if you're pushing 30 and you marry a 12-year-old, what are you talking about? You're not. You're probably just going to treat her as another wife to have babies and raise the babies. And that to me bums me out. I don't like that. Not that I'm going to go out to Nigeria and be like, stop that. But to me personally, I think that's too young. Now, I mentioned fraternal polyandry. Why on earth would you marry three brothers? This is where, if polygyny was to maximize the amount of offspring, this is to minimize it. So, this is when one woman will marry, usually brothers. It is very rare with special circumstances, and we mostly see it in Southeastern Asia, including Tibet, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and parts of India. Many of the places where this is practiced is up in the mountains where you don't have as much fertile farmland. So they're patrilineal, meaning land is passed from father to his sons. So let's say, I wish I had like a diagram to show you, but let's say you have 12 acres and you have four sons. You could say, okay, I'm going to divide it up equally. Each son gets 3 acres. 3 acres is not a lot, but you can still farm it and support a family. But then all of those sons get married and start having children. Now, each of their 3 acres has to be divided up amongst their sons. So now their sons are getting 1 to 2 acres. That's not a lot, and their sons are going to get even less. So, as a way to control how many children they're having so they don't get overpopulated, similar technique, one woman can only give birth once a year. So, she marries all of the brothers. They share her. Now, it's going to depend on the family, but they might have a little situation where Mondays and Tuesdays she's with Paul. Wednesdays and Thursdays she's with Enrique. I'm coming up with names on the fly, and so forth. When she finds out she's pregnant, there's really no way of knowing whose it is. So all 3 or 4 of those brothers communally raise the kids together because they all have a stake in that kid. They don't really know whose biologically it is, but they know it's the family's. So you might be sitting there, ladies, thinking, I don't want to marry brothers. That's a little too weird for me. But in this situation, it's kind of the best option for them to control the population. It's why it's so rare, because usually humans want to produce. We want to have as many kids as possible. And so it's more common to see polygyny than it is polyandry. We today, a lot of us will use the online marriage market. It is definitely common in industrial societies. Nowadays, because most of our interactions are online, we're losing the ability to meet romantic partners in our day-to-day life. Um, think of, and this is going to depend on the person, but I'll think of myself. Think of how much I remove interaction. Maybe I have a busy day and I do class online. So, doing class online, sure, I'm going to interact with my students, but I'm not going to interact with like the security guards on campus. I'm not going to interact with other professors or other janitorial staff. You know, I don't know, somebody at the gas station that I stop at to get a drink on the way there. All possible romantic partners in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not interacting with them because I'm doing this digitally. Similarly, even grocery shopping. Sometimes I use my phone and I make Meyer do the grocery shopping for me. And I just go pull up my car and pick up my order, and I talk to the kid that brings out my order, and that's about it. So we don't interact with people as often as we used to. So we've turned to the online marriage market. There are pros and cons. Some of the cons is you're going off of looks for a lot of it. A lot of people do, at least. Yes, you can look at the profile and look at their interests, things like that. But a lot of people just do the quick swipe based off looks. Another kind of con is it takes away some of the initial fun, in my opinion, um, of meeting someone in real life and having a crush and things like that. But some pros, maybe you lead a very busy life and you don't have time to go out somewhere and prowl for people to date. Maybe you're not a drinker because a lot of people go to bars to date. But if you're not a drinker, why are you going to a bar? So we can have this kind of endogamy and exogamy. Endogamy because we're staying within certain groups. Maybe I'm looking for other knitters and I crochet and I'm looking for people in the what's the word? Fiber arts. I'm trying to think of other examples. Macrame, there you go. And I'm looking for other people that do that or other crafters. Or maybe it's exogamy. Maybe I want to be on the next season of 90 Day Fiancé. So I go on Tinder and I pay for Tinder Plus. I'm sure there's something like that. And I say, okay, I want to look for people in Sri Lanka because I think their culture is nice and I would date someone there. And then I go move to Sri Lanka. So realistically, there's pros and cons to both, and it's just going to depend on the person. Okay. So that's all I have for today. It was kind of a short lesson because it was supposed to be lined up with the exam last week. So I was going to give you extra time for that. And then I gave you all the time last week because I got sick on the way there. So I'm sorry again about that. Also, just because I made a joke when I came back on when my Zoom closed, I didn't actually think y'all were talking crap about me. Don't worry. I have a bad habit of making that joke whenever I come into a conversation and I make the joke of like, talking about me. Don't worry, I wasn't like, they all hate me. But I will let you go there and get you a little time back. The way the schedule is going to work for the following weeks is I unfortunately had to take out art. So I just kind of moved us. We have, what, 3 more weeks before the final. Don't forget about your research paper. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me either at the end of this or email me. I will check that and I will get this wrapped up. So that is all I have for today. Thank you for joining me via Zoom. As far as I know, we will be in person next week, but you are free to go. Have a lovely evening, and I will see you next week. Thank you.
Sorry, my iPad died halfway through class and it took a second to get it back up.
That's okay. Sorry
Um,
about that.
no, you're good. I just want to let you know I wasn't skipping. My
Thank
I had
you.
technical
Oh, well, thank you for
difficulties.
letting us know. I'm just kidding. I'm just
You
kidding.
you guys have a good day. See you guys next week.
Too.
See ya.
I
You
was
said
wondering
you're
for the
letting us go?
I am. You're free to go.
Okay. Glad you're feeling better. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
for the essay, I was wondering if the 1,750 to 2,000 word limit,
Uh-huh.
if the 2,000 was a strict cutoff.
No, as long as you don't turn in like a 50-page paper. No, I'm not that
Okay,
strict. You're good.
okay. Because yeah, I have like another 5 paragraphs, and I was just like, I know I'm gonna be over.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all
Thanks.
right. Just to know, I know it
Yeah,
varies from person to person.
yeah, good question.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.